was great to get a chance to catch up with the mayor on housing, but we're not done with him yet. During part 2 of my interview, I asked the mayor why he thinks the city should consider safe outdoor spaces as part of the equation on solving homelessness. That's coming up in less than 30 minutes. Now, right now, let's welcome in our line opinion panelists for the week. Joining me at the virtual roundtable, we have Merritt Allen from Vox Optima Public Relations. My man, Michael Bird, the former president of the American Public Health Association. He's with us this week. And we're pleased to have Julianne Grimm. She's editor and publisher at the Santa Fe Reporter. Now, we're looking ahead to the upcoming 2023 legislative session, of course. And this week, we have some new indications on what the Democratic agenda could be. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham was sworn in for her second term late last week. And during her inauguration ceremony, she talked about her goals for New Mexico for the next 4 years. She laid out several priorities, mentioning things like affordable housing, homelessness, and early childhood education. We'll get into some of those topics in a moment, but let's start with an overarching theme. Merritt Allen, let me start with you, which was health care. The governor says she wants to create a new New Mexico health care authority. She wants to cover all public school employees' health care premium costs, and she wants to codify the right to get an abortion. With a Democratic majority on the House, Merritt, are these health care goals realistic or just overly ambitious? Got to throw it all out there before the session starts. How do you see this at this point?
Well, I see this as just more money without necessarily a lot of solutions, although I'm very interested to hear what Michael has to say about the healthcare agency. I just see that as another layer of administration that's perhaps not really delivering healthcare. Covering healthcare premiums for teachers, is that going to improve school scores or educational outcomes? No.
Might it attract more people to the business of teaching, which we desperately need?
Maybe. I don't know. We pour money into PED. We've already sunk so much money into early childhood. We have an early childhood investment fund. Now we have a constitutional amendment to raid the permanent fund for early childhood. One thing she never mentioned was child welfare, which is a different thing, which is CYFD, which is a tremendous issue. But of course, this was an inaugural speech, which is really a soft speech. She's going to talk about happy stuff.
Right.
I think we're going to hear the real nitty gritty in the State of the State speech in a few weeks.
That's a good distinction. I appreciate you mentioning that. That is a good distinction for folks to keep in mind. Michael, the governor also mentioned tackling poverty and homelessness, saying she would push to expand access to affordable housing. You know, addressing homelessness has been tricky here in Albuquerque, as you know. And as we'll discuss again later in the line, is the governor making the right choice to focus on statewide solutions to this housing situation? Should she be honing in on something a little bit finer, like where the problem is?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I think that, poverty really is the underlying issue in New Mexico. And I mean, being one of everybody, and this is nothing new to any one of us or anybody who's paying attention in terms of our national rating, in terms of one of the states that has one of the highest poverty rates. And many of the issues again are multifaceted, and there are no simple solutions to the issues that we're confronted by. I think that as far as what the governor's proposing to the legislature, until we really see something specific, it's really hard to, I think, comment on what she's proposing and how that would roll out. One of the things I think that is my concern, as well as the concern of many people, is Children, Youth, and Families Division, and the press and the stories about how children have not been well attended to, and some of the tragedies that have occurred. And so it's one thing to create a system. It's one thing, but it's another thing to really ensure that there's accountability and that those systems are functioning in the manner that they were established, and that they're meeting the needs of children and the community.
Mhm.
And until you have that, it's a little, and I'm not saying that, I mean, but that is, I think, something, if one is going to pay some attention to something, that is something that really deserves some attention. And so I hope there's some focus on that and making sure that system is functioning and protecting the children and
Good
families.
points there. CYFD is just still sort of hanging out there. Absolutely. Hey, Julianne, I'm going to switch just a bit of a gear here. A few days before the inauguration, the governor appointed 3 candidates to the Public Regulation Commission. She chose a former state lawmaker and 2 public utility experts. Now, notably left off the commission is a Native American perspective. And given the vested interests of tribal communities in northwestern part of our state, as you know, is it a mistake to not have a tribal voice on the PRC as opposed to, and you'll clue us in how she actually did it, but first things first, was that a mistake not having a Native voice on the council?
Well, I think that, it's good to back up a little bit and just talk about the process that New Mexico is, embarking on. This is a brand new thing. We've had, elected Public Regulation Commission with 5 members. Now we're switching to an appointed commission with 3 members. And the appointment process was crafted to mimic the judicial appointment process.
Mm-hmm.
And so you started with 62 applicants. 15 of them were then interviewed by this committee, which, famously included legislators and a number of other folks. And then there was a short list of 9 that went to the governor, and she chose 3 from the short list.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you sort of look at the broader representation, it's instructive in answering your question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also really noteworthy that the state Supreme Court shot down a sort of 11th hour piece of litigation, attempting to inject more diversity and really there were some geographic requirements about could be a certain number of people from certain counties, but there's nothing in the criteria that says you have to pick someone from Indian country. You have to pick someone who's lives in one of the places like the San Juan or the Permian Basin,
Right.
The choosing of those 3 people for this, highly specialized small board. Really, there was a lot that went into it, but the Supreme Court, I got distracted from that a little bit. They considered this case and said, no, the constitutional amendment was properly brought forth and it was clear. And what's happening now is what people voted for. And so I think that, we're in a position where we have to move forward with that.
Mm-hmm.
The other sort of interesting political wrinkle is when the 3 selected commissioners were announced, the governor also announced this new advisory committee, which she's calling the Tribal Advisory Council. And it has requirements of membership from all, kind of several different quarters. But again, this is a small group that she's calling for the creation of.
Mm-hmm.
And for that group to then advise the people that really have the power, that's like too little too late on that front. It's kind of trying to make up for the fact that, there's no natives on this board. Also, there's no women on the PRC now, which
Right.
I think, is an issue. And really though, I'm curious to see how the first decisions kind of roll out and how the hearings go.
Yeah.
Because the PRC doesn't get a lot of attention until things are ugly, and they're pretty ugly right now.
Pretty fair enough there. Michael, your thoughts on that, the idea that this advisory committee that would have no voting response, it just, how does that hit your gut?
Well, to be honest, it stinks. Under the previous system, there was Native representation.
Mm-hmm.
In New Mexico, we like to talk about how multicultural we are and how we're all kumbaya and I mean, there's a lot of that sort of facade,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll say it's a facade to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is there is such a thing as tribal sovereignty. There is such a thing, and the federal government recognizes that the state government has recognized it as well in many ways. But when it comes to this, no Native representation, it's an affront. I mean, you know, there are qualified Native people who deserve to have a seat at the table, and the fact that and we're 11% of the population, we have significant holdings in terms of land holdings. Businesses here in New Mexico generate incredible revenue for the state, and I think it's insulting to create then a token advisory group where nobody has to listen to. They can voice their concerns, but it's well, thank you very much.
And getting to meet once a quarter, I just that's bizarre to me. I don't get that. Let me bounce to Merritt here real quick. Merritt, is the problem the number here? I've often felt, and now here we are, that doing 3 versus 5 on the PRC, someone was going to lose. And now we have Mr. Little, who Michael mentioned not by name, who was a perfectly qualified Native American man, and no women. That would have been 2 people that would have been really good to have on the PRC. Did we basically screw this up fundamentally by making this a 3-seat? Go ahead. Sorry.
You also lose regional coverage.
Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, but also, one of the goals, and I think the reason voters voted to professionalize the PRC, if you will, was to try and streamline the process.
That's right.
Because the regulatory climate in New Mexico is a mess, and that's why one major reason why we can't attract businesses to our state. So I don't think a 5-person panel is too large. You can certainly get consensus and move business forward with 5 people. It's not too large. And then say that you shall not have more than 3 of any major political party. So you could have 3 Ds, 2 Rs with a D governor. That would have been fine.
That's right.
I think that size would probably make more sense for coverage and for skill sets. Not having somebody out of the National Energy Labs, considering we're an energy producing state, and we need more consideration of how we move forward from a fossil fuel to a sustainable, renewable energy economy. We need more legal expertise as we try and streamline our Byzantine regulatory, really ad hoc Byzantine regulatory climate. We seem to come up with regulations on the fly as issues come up, and it's not a good situation. So I feel like the current PRC situation is an attempt to make things better. It's not a complete solution for the reasons that have just been brought up.
Yep. That was Joseph D. Little, by the way. I didn't get his full name out there. He's the former general counsel to the All Indian Pueblo Council. And I would have thought it would have been a proud, I don't know. It's a very interesting thing. Who could not say this man is not qualified to be on the PRC? I'd like to see somebody try to convince me of that. Got to move on, though. Thanks to our line opinion panel for that one. We'll meet right back here in less than 1 minute. Talk about the latest developments in Albuquerque's debate over safe outdoor spaces.